Hi there, welcome to this week's weekly video. I wanted to share with you something that we have been helping clients with during the last 8 months, in the first 8 months of 2020. Who of us could have predicted the pandemic and the reality of COVID on all of us, both personally, professionally, for businesses? None of us knew that something of this scope and scale could happen in our lifetime, and here we are well into it and heading into the last part of 2020. I wanted to focus this video on the importance of reskilling and upskilling in a post-pandemic reality. If anything, what has happened and what's become very apparent is in the pre-pandemic, we were very much still in a traditional model of business where most of us were working in offices, commuting to work, attending events in person, all of those aspects. And then, of course, in the last 8 months, working remotely and companies having to pivot and adjust their systems to that remote work reality, and individuals having to really increase their flexibility factor and their ability to adapt to these fast-changing realities. And we've had many conversations with CEOs and leaders and workers saying that they've struggled mostly with the people part of the remote work reality. In other words, communicating in a way that's as effective as it was when they were in person-to-person contact. Or how do we lead people to be motivated and engaged when we're not sitting across from them and hearing them interact with coworkers and with clients? So we've been helping a lot of our clients really navigate what's next around a post-pandemic reality. And we've also been helping them identify the skills that their workers need in order to really succeed in a post-pandemic reality. Currently, we're working on a new infographic on reskilling and upskilling for the post-pandemic reality, and we will be sharing that and uploading it to the site nextmapping.com. I wanted this video to just give you some pause for thought as an individual, but also as a leader, if you are a leader, around what we should be looking for. And literally there's 6 steps or 6 things that we should be looking for in reskilling. Number 1 is identifying the skills gaps. Now, for a lot of organizations, they've been doing that as part of their regular HR processes. They've been looking at that and saying, okay, who are the people on the team? What are their current skills? What skills do they need? But we're now in a new reality where the skills that are needed in a work environment, office environment, are very different than the skills needed in a remote environment. So we need to have people with up-leveled communication ability. And when we look at communication skills, that includes the ability to influence virtually, the ability to negotiate virtually, the ability to work with teams on multitudes of projects virtually. And that requires an increased sensitivity to the nuance of interaction. So when you're human to human, face to face, you can see body language, you can feel the inflections and the differences. When you're virtual and on video, you can still do that, but it requires a new level of attention and your communication ability to look for cues and signs of whether you're on the same page or you're making progress. That requires a new heightened level of presence, a new heightened level of attunement, and a new heightened level of using language to meet people at their personality. So that's number 1. The second one is identifying how to bridge the skills gap. So once you've identified the skills gaps, now you got to go, okay, what is it that we need to do? 50% of executives surveyed have said that they have not fully identified the skills gaps of their current teams, which means now is an opportunity to really focus on who has the skill gaps, what are those skills gaps, and then how do we identify what those are. Thirdly, we want to look at launching tailored learning journeys. So how do we then take the skills gaps that we've identified and then personalize a learning journey for each individual that fits with A, their learning style, B, the remote reality. So is part of their learning going to be technical learning that needs to be guided? Recently, I worked with a client and helped them align the technology of WalkMe, which is an overlaid technology that helps go on top of a new technology that's being trained, and it points to helping people learn the technology through on-screen guidance. So that's an example of, okay, is it technical training and part of making that part of the training journey? But then in addition to that, part of that learning journey is what is the coaching that they're going to receive, the individual, the worker is going to receive. And is that coaching also on the people aspect, how to be a better communicator, how to negotiate better, how to work in a team more effectively, how to identify personalities, how to work with a multiple intelligence lens. Those are all components of that learning journey. Fourthly, we want to then look to, if you haven't already and you want to expand this, is to link up with your learning partners. So you obviously would have in-house learning partners that are focused on reskilling and upskilling the teams. You also want to identify who are your outsourced learning partners. We're working with a client right now where we're one of their outsourced learning partners on online skill development for future-ready skills, such as everyone is a leader, such as negotiation skills and critical thinking, such as innovation skills. So identify your learning partners and how are you going to deliver the learning? Is it going to be remote, virtual, like video training? Is it going to be supported by coach or outside coach perspective? Those are some of the elements that you want to look at. You also want to then look to really developing your leaders' ability to lead remote teams. Right now, leaders are being stretched. They're navigating multiple challenges and realities, and one of the biggest stretches is how do we keep our teams engaged and motivated when we're not face-to-face with them in the traditional office environment. And so really looking at, okay, what are we doing on a regular basis? So I have a client right now where she's the CEO and she's doing personalized video and audio messages for her teams on a weekly basis. Just, encouraging them to keep going, giving an update from her perspective on where they are in status updates. In addition to virtual video conferences with her teams, having her regular one-on-ones with team members, just things like that that continue the touch points, because that whole phrase out of sight, out of mind is a constant challenge for remote working reality. And then also really importantly is having those sort of, water cooler chats where they're not necessarily about work, but they're about life and how people are dealing and the support that they need. And especially now in September with some kids going back to school and parents dealing with that reality. And there's a lot that is being navigated right now in the month of September by workers and leaders, and having to sort that out requires a tremendous amount of psychological awareness of people by leaders, of their workers, more tolerance and space for the realities of workers juggling these extra challenges, and then also being very crystal clear in communication around expectations and performance measurement, and when people need to identify when they're burning out and they need to take a break. So leaders need to really ramp up their ability to be empathetic while still holding workers accountable. And that's a delicate dance. And we find that helping leaders navigate this is one of the biggest skills development opportunities for the reskilling and upskilling opportunities of the future of work. And then lastly is we need to meet the skills gaps needed with speed. In other words, we can't just be thinking about this and talking about it. We need to be looking at the skills gaps now. Where are we now? Who are the people on our team? What are the skills that they need? So that's critical. And then building those learning partner plans and those skill developments plans and getting leaders up to speed on reskill. It's urgent now. And the reason for that is we can't be behind the 8 ball on this as we head into 2021, because the skills gaps are going to continue to widen, and those that are on top of reskilling and upskilling their workers are going to be having the competitive advantage. So this is really, I feel, a huge imperative for the future of work 2021 and beyond, is really anchoring in on the reskill and upskill, really not just applying an internal training program, but building those learning partners and those multiple ways of people learning and skills developing, and being able to leverage that so that workers are feeling that they have the ability to flex, adapt. They're learning the change skills. They're learning the skills needed to stay agile in these fast times of change. So in this week's video, it's all about reskilling, upskilling. For yourself individually, asking yourself, where are my skills gaps? Where do I need to improve? Where can I get those skills gaps met and filled? And really building a personalized plan so that we're continually learning and growing and meeting the future ready with our skills adaptability. So that's this week's message. If you have any comments, please post them below. Please send us an email, Cheryl@nextmapping.com. Please join us on social media. We'd like to hear from you and love to hear what you're doing to reskill and upskill to be future ready now. Hey everybody, so on this video this week I want to talk about something I blogged about and getting a lot of response and feedback from people that have read the blog around Generation COVID. Have you heard about this generation? It's Generation COVID, also known as Gen C, and it's anybody under the age of 20 who's been living as a youth through the pandemic for the last year and a half. There has been a previous generation that lived through a pandemic, 1918, but this generation, Generation COVID, is the first generation to have lived not only through a pandemic, but also at the same time political unrest, racial injustice, governmental upheaval, all sorts of major disruptions impacting the mindset of Generation C. Now, for the parents of Generation C, you know what I'm talking about here. Parents have been struggling with homeschooling. Parents have been struggling with navigating the emotional well-being of their kids who are trying to deal with social isolation, to deal with varying disruptions in their lifestyles, to not being able to meet up with friends the way they have in the past. Some young people have not been at school at all for a year and a half. Others have gone back to school, and even elementary school children are wearing masks. This is the generation that have been told they can't do things because of the virus. This is a generation who has realized that there is a focus on health and well-being that I don't believe in all my research any other generations have been made so aware of the importance of washing our hands and wearing our masks and being very socially conscious of how we do behave when we're out in public. So yes, of course, you're watching this and you could say, well, all of us are living through this, therefore there's going to be a social impact for every generation. And that is true. However, I take specific interest in Generation COVID as in how is these disruptions that they're living through going to shape their future? How are they going to look at the future of work? How are they going to look at how they want to show up in the world? I actually believe, following the millennials, Gen C and the Gen Zs, I believe that Gen C, because of having lived through this is going to be a more empathetic generation. They're going to be much more dialed into how people feel, really sensitive to how people are feeling. I also believe that this generation is going to choose to work, if you thought millennials and Gen Zs wanted more flexibility, this generation has watched their parents work remotely. So now they're thinking, well, why would I ever want to work anywhere else but wherever I want? So where millennials and Gen Zs have been pushing for remote work even pre-pandemic, now as we head into this Gen C infiltration into the workplace, they're going to start questioning where work is done, how it's done, and frankly, they'll know that it can be done remotely because they watched their parents work remotely throughout the pandemic. Other things we're seeing socially is that in addition to the increased empathy and the increased desire to work differently, socially they're going to see work and how they live very differently. So there's been a few social trends such as rural migration, where a lot of millennials and Gen Z parents are moving their kids rurally, and now Gen C is the generation that is now growing up with growing their own food, sort of back to basics, if you will, having family dinners around the table, sort of boomeranging back to traditional values. And Gen C is the recipient of that. And so they're experiencing this sort of boomerang effect from technology and everybody on their devices during dinner and sort of all scattered all through the house, and now to a return to somewhat, I would say, more traditional values. I know a lot of people that I've surveyed have said, that some of the positives of the pandemic is increased family time, is increased, time with their children, is less commuting time. So all of this is impacting Gen C and their choices and how they see the world. So I personally hold a lot of optimism for what that means for the future. There's no question that the last year and a half has been highly challenging for everyone, but specifically for children, there's also a greater focus on mental well-being, on emotional well-being. I know a lot of parents have had children's feelings range from anxiety to sadness to confusion, and so having to support their kids and their youth through this. I really want to give a shout out to all of the teachers and the educators and anyone working with youth for the support that they're giving through these times. I'm a grandparent. I have a 5-year-old granddaughter, Olive, who goes to kindergarten, and then I have a 16-month-old grandson, Austin, and I watch my kindergarten grandchild, and they are still going to school here where we live. They're being masked, but I just watch her, the way she talks about the virus and what she can do and what she can't do, and how she's very socially aware, and that's 5 years old. So there's a almost like an emotional intelligence that's going to be much more developed for Generation C, in my opinion, because of having gone through this experience. So something to think about. I want you, it's very relatively new as far as being talked about. It's a trend that we began to research and identify last year when the pandemic began. And so we're sort of on the leading edge of researching and investigating the impact of Gen C on the future. So stay tuned here. I'm going to be talking a lot more about this generation and based on our research, what we can expect from their mindset and how they're going to look at the future. So stay tuned here for more. But right now, I just wanted to introduce you to the whole concept of Generation COVID, what it can mean. And by the way, if you're a parent, a shout out to you right now, or any grandparent or anyone helping our children through this time. Parents, you have just been amazing, dealing with the disruptions of homeschooling, dealing with the disruptions of having the emotional range that your children are dealing with, and just major shout out to all the parents that have been dealing with their Generation Cs during this time. So stay tuned for more, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Hi there. On this week's weekly video, I want to share with you something that I'm finding with conversations that I've been having with clients in the last few weeks around, and something I'm noticing with leaders and emerging leaders and team members, is that with the disruptions we've felt with COVID, with all the challenges we've been facing with disruptions and change, that we tend to get overwhelmed. And then what happens is we try to use like newfangled systems, or we Google something and we think, oh, that's going to be the solution for me. And what I'd really like to emphasize is that we really need to, in many ways, go back to basics here. And when I say back to basics, for example, clear expectation setting is a leadership and a self-leadership skill. The ability to say, this is my deliverable, I will get back to you within 72 hours, and then being able to manage your time. So that whole concept of over-promising and under-delivering, we don't want to be doing that, specifically in these times where we're managing so many different priorities. What we want to do is we want to under-promise and over-deliver. And that is, I say that that's a basic because I think many of us lose sight of that. And, communication 101 is, if we're setting expectations, then we're actually managing not only our own time, but we're managing our service delivery for others. So for example, I had a client where she had a personal goal to respond and get through her promises to clients within 24 hours. And the kind of work she's doing is highly intense, paperwork intensive, focus intensive, so that she was burning herself out by setting a self-imposed timeline of that 24-hour period. Instead, what we want to do is look rationally at what's the client expectation, what will make them happy, and how do we over-deliver. And so in her case, talking together, she said, honestly, our competition is not getting back until a week, so I feel comfortable giving a 72-hour response time and then really turning it around in 48 hours, so then we're actually creating that greater value perception in the mind of the client. So that's an example of a back to basics. And another back to basics, managing our time. In today's technology, we feel like we have to be available to all people at all times, when in fact we can leverage our time by having, I'm away for a couple of hours while I work on this intensive project alert on MS Teams or on Salesforce or on any type of office technology that we're using. It's okay to have a do not disturb if we communicate why we're doing it and how it's helping us to leverage our time. So I think that when we talk about back to basics, it's like time management basics, setting expectation basics can help us alleviate a lot of self-created stress. And I think also just not getting, another basic is don't assume when you're communicating with people. Don't assume that if they're not immediately texting you back or emailing you back or calling you back or however you communicate, that they're avoiding you or that they're not, caring for you. Instead, follow up with sort of an expectation, or set that expectation. Can you get back to me within the next 2 days? So I think we're at a time here with the leverage of time and technology and working from home to be really more clear in our communication. And that's a basic, like simply asking for help is a communication basic.
Admitting that we're overloaded is a communication basic. Saying that this is what I need in order to do my job better, resourcing, is a communication basic. So my message for this week is, what basic do you need to get back to that can help you feel more empowered, have less stress, and still meet those customer deliverables that you want to meet? So I wish you the best. If you need any help in helping you recognize the basics and to get back on track, or to increase more energy, or to leverage your success, please drop me an email, Cheryl@nextmapping.com. Be happy to discuss it with you further. All the best. Take care.